Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So on September 27th of this year, Wizards of the Coast did a celebration of D&D, which they streamed online, and it's still available on YouTube if you want to check it out. But the main purpose of this series of streams was, I think, probably mainly to kind of promote the upcoming products While Beyond the Witchlight for sure, as well as the upcoming Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And then also they're releasing a compendium of rule books at the beginning of next year, and I think they want to promote that as well. But one thing that got probably the most attention of this entire stream is they discussed the next evolution of D&D coming in 2024. So let's talk about what that means for the game, and I'm going to make some wild predictions. Hi, if you are enjoying this content and you would be interested in supporting this channel, please do so through Patreon. You'll find a link to my Patreon page in the video description. Patrons of this channel can see these videos early and without YouTube ads, and my top-level patrons join me and play some D&D every month. Today I'd like to thank these top-level patrons: Airhead, Alex Oquendo Vang, Alexander Baldwin, Alex R., Rob Reichelt, Aurelio Christian, Awesome Face, Ben Potts, Benjamin, Black, and Bloody Nine. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get going. So here is the announcement.
I know there's been a lot of speculation about this, but I can actually reveal today that we have, earlier this year, we began work on the next evolution of Dungeons and Dragons, new versions of the core rule books, which will be coming out in 2024 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons.
And I imagine the first question would be, so should we expect a new edition of D&D? And I think that will depend on how you define a new edition. I mean, if we look at second edition D&D, it's very, very much first edition D&D, but cleaned up. But then third edition, fourth edition, and fifth edition were all quite different from each other. And then they snuck a 3.5 in there as well. Now, what I think is more likely is that we're going to see essentially a 5.5 edition. Now, I have my doubts they'll call it 5.5, but I think that's what we're going to see, and that's supported by the comment he makes right here.
One thing, by the way, I can assure you is these new versions of the books are going to be completely compatible with all those 5th edition products you already own and love, and all the products were released between now and then, so don't panic there. But next year we'll have lots more to say about the future of D&D. We'll talk not only about the new books, but about some cool new things we're doing in the digital arena to deliver some exciting new Dungeons & Dragons experiences.
So what we get from this comment is that the new edition needs to be compatible, and they've made a commitment now, so that is the way it's going to be. Now, compatible means that basically the core structure of how the rules work need to remain the same. But things like character options, those can change however they want. The other thing we get from this is he talks about the core books coming out. So the core books will be Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. So we will get new editions of those 3 books, and they'll be different enough from the current editions that they'll be a complete replacement. So if we're talking compatibility, you're not going to be able to make a ranger out of the Player's Handbook 5th edition and have it look like a ranger that you make using this new 5.5 or next evolution. Now, he also made an announcement about moving into the digital realm, and frankly, I'm probably the last person on earth you want making predictions about what's going to be happening in the digital realm. Whatever I guess is going to be way off, so there's no point in me going down that road. I'll let other people make predictions on that. But in terms of what kind of changes we can expect to the rules, that's more up my alley. So that's what I'm going to be doing some predictions today. Now, it's going to be impossible to know what the changes are going to be because they're still working on them. So they don't even know themselves yet what those rules will be. So whatever I'm saying here, this isn't any inside knowledge. This is just my best guesses. But I do think we can get a little bit more information out of what he says right here.
You probably noticed, the fans noticed that we released a bunch of surveys asking for feedback on various pieces of the player's handbook over the last year. And I know a lot of people were wondering what those were about. Well, this is what those are about. That's us beginning work on this sort of, as I said, next evolution of the game.
And notice that he said that the surveys we've seen about the player's handbook are specifically them doing research for what they want to do with the new player's handbook. And I think we need to consider what their goals are by getting this information. And this will be the last clip I show from this, but here's Jeremy Crawford talking about what kind of direction they take when listening to fan comments.
We're always listening because we want to make sure that we're not only crafting play experiences and rules and stories that appeal to our longtime D&D fans, but that also are inviting to people who have just discovered D&D this week.
So right now they're working on the player's handbook, and we know that they have done those surveys and they're using those surveys for information that will help them develop the new player's handbook. And the other thing we know is that they are very interested in being more inviting to new players. Now, this is an important point because if we look at second edition, it basically cleaned up first edition. And then they went into third edition. Now, third edition was mainly a way to try to bring D&D players back to D&D because what happened is during second edition, TSR kind of imploded and existing role players started going to other games. So third edition was an attempt to take existing role players and bring them back to D&D by offering them more and more complicated options for character development and that kind of thing. And then 3.5 was specifically designed for third edition players to try to clean that up. And then they went to fourth edition, and fourth edition was specifically designed to try to bring in video gamers. They were quite open about that the intention of those rules was to try to give D&D more of a feel like you might expect from playing World of Warcraft or something like that, because that was such a huge community. They thought if they could bring some of those players into D&D, that would make that edition very successful. Now, history has told us that fourth edition was a big failure. And the reason is because people who play World of Warcraft are happy playing World of Warcraft and they're not looking for a tabletop version of that game. If players who play World of Warcraft also play D&D, they're not looking for the same experience. They're looking for a different experience. So fourth edition didn't end up doing very well. And then they went into fifth edition. Now, fifth edition is the first time since first edition that they specifically designed the game to try to invite new players. And we've seen how successful that is. They want the next evolution to lean even more in that direction. So if we're thinking about what kind of things we would like to see in the rules, I think we also need to think about what kind of things the designers want to put in the rules to bring in new players. And sometimes those things aren't going to align. So I think us as existing players are not going to see everything we want to see in the new editions. Now, I'm going to focus mainly on the player's handbook here. This is what they're working on right now. This is what they've done surveys on right now. I think this is the one that's going to be easiest to make predictions on, other than the Monster Manual. I think we kind of have some ideas on what's going to happen with the Monster Manual. We certainly will have lots of ideas what's going to happen with the Monster Manual after they release their gift set at the beginning of next year. But in terms of the player's handbook, this is what I expect to see. So first off, the core structure of the rules needs to remain the same. This is the only way they keep previous products compatible. So if you want to play Curse of Strahd, they want you to be able to take out Curse of Strahd and play it using the new rules without a lot of work. Now, do I expect there to be a lot of players using Xanathars or Tashas or Fizbins after the new evolution of D&D? No, I think, and this is my guess, but my guess is those will become completely discarded once the new evolution of D&D comes out. Now, it's not because I think that those will be unusable. I just am speaking from prior knowledge. When they came out with 3.5, one of the things they mentioned was it was going to be completely compatible with 3rd edition. But I'll tell you that once 3.5 came out, we didn't use 3rd edition products anymore. We could have. They were still potentially usable, but I think players were kind of looking for that fresh slate because 3rd edition had become somewhat bloated and they didn't want that bloat anymore. And then same thing happened when Paizo introduced Pathfinder, because Pathfinder was basically 3.5 modified once again. It's often called 3.75. I'm talking about 1st edition Pathfinder, of course. And again, their promise when designing it was this is going to be completely compatible with your 3.5 books. But nobody was using 3.5 books after Pathfinder came out. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Somebody probably was, but the vast community was not. We started again from fresh, from 3.75 or Pathfinder, and then it got its own bloat. And eventually, of course, they went to 2nd edition Pathfinder, and nobody's using the 1st edition books anymore unless they're playing 1st edition. So that's first off. Anything that you have for character options that currently exists, I do not expect us to continue using it, or I do not expect you can join a table and expect those books to be used once the new evolution comes out. Second thing, let's talk about classes. So my guess is we're going to have all the same classes. So monks, rangers, bards, wizards, they'll all be in the new book. They will all be revised. None of them will be the same as they are now, but they will all still exist. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are new classes. So they have all the base classes. They might include the Artificer in the next player's handbook. Maybe not. I don't know. It depends on how happy they are with it. But they may also have other classes as well. We'll see. But one thing I'm confident on is if it's a class in the player's handbook in 5th edition, the next evolution, it will still be a class. So what kind of changes can we expect to the base classes? Well, I think our first hint is Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. If we look at the optional class features, this kind of gives us an idea of the direction they were kind of working towards already. I expect we'll go further down that route. Now, the optional class features in Tasha's, generally speaking, for the most part, made the classes more powerful. I expect even more so in the next evolution of D&D. So if you were to make a base 5th edition fighter, then you had a 5th edition fighter using this next evolution, I expect the next evolution fighter is going to be mechanically superior or have mechanically superior options. Definitely what you want is for the characters to be more powerful, because then the players want to play that, and if the players want to play that, then they buy the books. Now, what don't I expect to see with the new classes? One of the things that I've heard over and over again from existing 5th edition players is that what they would love to see are more feats and more access to feats. So the idea would be that maybe characters get ability score increases and feats, and then maybe there's more feats to choose from. The issue with that, I think, is that that is not inviting to new players. If we consider feats already, they're already an optional rule for a reason. That is because if you're bringing in a new player, feats are a bit overwhelming to put on top of everything else. And if we just add more feats and more feat options, then it becomes even more overwhelming for new players. And Jeremy Crawford has been clear that's not the direction they want to go. So I don't think that's going to happen. That doesn't mean they can't do anything that might not feel like feats. I could see maybe more class options. I could see cases where maybe you receive a class feature and you get choices to make, and that might feel a bit like feats. I could see something like that, because that is something that would be a lot easier for a new player to manage. So if you had a fighter character reach level 2 and you got a new player, then maybe they will have an option that number 1, you could take Action Surge, or number 2, you could take this other feature that maybe is somewhat equivalent to Action Surge. And then there's choices to make, but that choice is confined enough that a new player only has to look at 2 options rather than an entire huge list of feats. So I could see something like that, but I don't think we're going to see more feats. Next, let's talk about races. I don't think they're going to use the word race at all in the next evolution of D&D. I think they are basically signed on to this point on lineages. I think that's the way it's going to go. I don't think we're going to see races like we did in D&D. I definitely don't think we're going to see ability score increases as part of your lineage option either. Right now, if you choose a lineage, you can choose 3+1s or a +1 and a +2 on your ability scores. I expect that is going to be gone. Now, I mentioned in a previous video that I thought you could do without ability scores in Dungeons & Dragons entirely. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that might be a smart way to go, but I don't think that's going to happen. And the main reason is, again, compatibility. Because if you're going to want people to be able to use their Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, then you have creatures, they have ability scores. Those ability scores have to remain in the new edition. They've tied their hands there. They want this to be compatible. You need to keep ability scores or it's not compatible anymore. But I do expect that lineage is no longer going to impact your ability scores, which means, of course, that you make a kobold or you make a half orc and their strengths will have the same minimum and the same maximum. Whether that makes sense or not isn't going to be a factor. That's the way I expect it's going to be. Now, what about multiclassing? Multiclassing is next. Again, this is an optional feature in 5th edition. And again, it is a feature that is more for experienced players than for new players. Not overly inviting to new players. New players, it's much easier to just take a class and go with it. I think if they keep multiclassing, and I expect they probably will keep multiclassing, and the reason I think they'll probably keep it is because there's just no point in getting rid of it if it's an optional feature. And I think it will still be optional, still be one of those variants that some players might use and some might not. What I would hope to see, and I'm going to be positive here and think that maybe they will do this, is that I think multiclassing might not be as optimal as it is now. Ultimately, and ideally, I think what you want from multiclassing is if you make a fighter wizard that you have some aspects of fighter, you have some aspects of wizard, but it's not more powerful than either a fighter or a wizard. And that's not the case right now, and I expect they're going to at least try to think on how they might make it that case. Now, you don't want it to be worse either. That's hard to do, but I do think there's an option here when you are making the new class features. Maybe they don't get as front-loaded, or maybe there's something about the front-loading that doesn't convert nicely to multiclassing. Without seeing the new classes, it's hard to make any guesses on how multiclassing will work beyond I expect that it is going to still exist. I expect it will still be optional, and I expect that it might be a little more smooth. Now, I want to talk about backgrounds. Now, I made a prediction already that I thought that races or lineages will no longer have ability score increases tied to them. Really, my top prediction, I think ability score bonuses are going to now be part of backgrounds. So if you're a sage, I think you might get a bonus to intelligence and wisdom. If you're a soldier, I think you might get bonuses to strength and constitution. If you're an entertainer, I think you might get bonuses to dexterity and charisma. I know they want to take ability score bonuses out of race or lineage altogether, and I think this is the way they might do that. So right now, that's my prediction. Backgrounds are going to have ability score increases. We'll see. I still think they'll involve proficiencies like tool proficiencies and languages and skill proficiencies, but I think they might also include ability score increases. So the choice of background is going to become more important to your character than it has been up to now. Now, when it comes to equipment, I don't expect any big changes. I know some players would love to see more differences between long swords and battle axes and so on and so forth. I don't think we're going to see that. I think, if anything, it'll be even more simplified. But what I do hope is that we'll have a little more clarification on how certain things work. I don't think we're going to see, I know there's been some predictions about how they might have rules for weapon sizes, because we've talked on this channel about what happens if you are enlarged and you pick up a giant sword? Does it do the same damage as it says in the monster manual? And I don't think we're going to get anything for that in the player's handbook. Maybe we'll have a clarification that that just doesn't happen, but I don't think we're going to get any actual rules for different weapon sizes in the player's handbook. Now, in terms of the core of the rules, so what happens in combat, how turns are taken, how initiative works, I don't expect any major changes on any of it. I think that stuff is going to remain largely the same. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some clarifications. I wouldn't be surprised if there's simplification, and I would hope that it would be condensed and easier to reference the rule you're looking for. But in terms of how those rules work, I don't expect any major changes. So what about spells? How do I think spells might change in the next evolution? Well, my hope, and I have no confidence in this at all, but my hope is they won't call them spell levels anymore. I hope they'll call them anything but spell levels, because spell levels, of course, is confusing. When I talk about a level of spell, then I mean a different thing than the level of your character. And a level 5 character cannot cast level 5 spells. That is just a layer of complication that doesn't need to be there, a layer of confusion that doesn't need to be there, other than tradition. I think they could get rid of those, and I hope they do. I'm not confident they will, but I do hope they do. Whether they want to call them spell ranks or spell plateaus, whatever, something other than level, that would be great. So if you're listening, designers, consider changing the name of spell levels to something else. Now, do I think spell slots are going to work the same? I kind of think so. I'm not sure about that one. But I think if I was to predict, I would predict they're going to remain largely the same as they do now. As for spells themselves, I think we're going to see some changes. There are certain spells I just don't think are going to be in the next evolution. Now, the most obvious one to me is summoning spells. We saw a whole new list of summoning spells in Tasha's, and if those spells had been in the player's handbook, then that would have been that. We wouldn't have had conjure animals. We wouldn't have had conjure woodland beings. Those spells would just be gone. I wouldn't be surprised if there are no spells like that anymore, where you have to reference the monster manual to determine how your spell works. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to go to templates, and I think that's going to be for all summoning spells. That's going to be a universal for summoning spells in the new player's handbook. Now, they might still have a conjure animal spell, but it would be like the summon beast spell. So they might keep names, but I don't think the design of those spells are going to stay the same. Now, I also expect major changes to the polymorph spell or any spell that works like polymorph. It might be templates. I'm not sure. I gotta think they're going to keep those kinds of spells around because they're kind of important to the lore, but I can't see them keeping them the same. So I would expect major design changes on those kinds of spells as well. I don't know whether they're going to use templates or just give you a few options, but this idea that you can turn into any beast of this challenge rating or lower, I think that'll be gone. And we just won't see that kind of spell anymore in the next evolution. Now, for all the other spells, I don't know if I would expect a lot of significant changes. I think there will likely be some rebalancing. There's some spells that they probably know now are not very good. So if those spells remain, I think they'll get boosted. Some spells they might know are too powerful. Those kind of spells might get nerfed a bit. We'll see. I would expect some rebalancing. How much confidence I have that they're going to balance it well, I don't have a lot. Now, on my wish list, I wish that spellcasters got more spells that were less powerful. If I was designing the game from scratch, that's what would happen. I do not expect that to happen, but that would be on my wish list. Christmas is coming up. Hey, designers, consider making some changes. I know that would be a lot of work, but I think it would make a better game. And I think it would make spellcasting still really interesting, but take away this thing where spellcasters just kind of leapfrog ahead of marshals. We could fix that. I don't expect it to be fixed. But speaking of fixing things, going back to classes, there's going to be rebalancing. And we're definitely going to see a more powerful Ranger. Now, there's lots of people out there who don't think the Ranger probably needs boosting, but I suspect we'll see boosting of the Ranger. And I'm hoping now we might see a boosting of the Monk. Now, I know about a year and a half ago, I was very much alone in saying that monks probably needed a boost. I know when I came out with that video that I said that monks suck, I know that the general consensus was monks weren't overly powerful, but they were fine. But I've seen that consensus fall apart in the last year and a half. I like to think I had something to do with that. But now I see all the time other channels, game designers talking about how would we fix the monk. That's great because that means that more people out there recognize that the monk needs a fix. If more people realize it, then there's a better chance that the designers find out that the monk needs a fix as well, even if they don't watch any of my content. Now they can watch content from all kinds of creators who talk about fixing the monk, and then they realize it needs a fix. So I'm hoping we'll see something with the monk. I kind of think it will happen. I'm not 100% confident, but I kind of think we'll see it. And I guess the final thing we could talk about is conditions. So do I think conditions are going to change? I wouldn't be surprised if some conditions change. I don't think we're going to see a bunch of new conditions, and I don't think we're going to see any conditions that exist disappear. There might be new conditions added. We might see rebalancing of the current conditions or clarifications on how they work, but I do not expect major changes to conditions. So mostly, I think there will be cleanup. I think the biggest changes will be, I think classes are going to look different. Still going to go up by levels, still going to have a level chart, but I think the big difference will be, I expect there will be a difference in how we get new features. I am moderately confident that there's going to be options for players when they achieve a new level rather than just getting a feature. I don't think they're going to add a lot of feats. I don't think they're going to add feats at all. I think feats might still be around, but I'm not even certain about that. But if they are around, they will certainly still be optional. I don't think they're going to be a bigger part of character creation, but I would expect more options in terms of class features. With races, I think they will be called lineages, not races, and I think ability score bonuses will be gone. The other stuff, like, Dragonborn being able to breathe fire, that's going to be around, but features like languages and tool proficiencies, we know those will be gone, and ability score bonuses will be completely removed from lineages. Where do I think they'll be added? I think they'll be added to backgrounds. We'll see. Maybe they'll just give you more ability scores right off the bat, but I kind of think that the obvious place to put them is backgrounds, so I think that's probably what they're going to do. We've seen kind of the way that summoning spells are going. I think that will continue to be the case, and I'm predicting big changes on spells like polymorph and those kinds of spells. There might be some rebalancing of other spells, I suspect so. There might be some clarifications of some other spells, some clarifications in how they're worded, that as well. But I don't expect major changes to how spells are worked. I hope they won't use the word level anymore for spells. Don't know if that's going to happen though. And other than that, I expect the organization of the book to be better, and I expect clarifications in how rules are written, but otherwise I expect the rules themselves are not going to see major changes. And that is what I'm kind of predicting for the Player's Handbook. So let me know what you think they're going to be doing with the Player's Handbook, where you think I might have gotten some predictions right, or where you think I might be way off. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, till next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.